To this interview. I'm Megan Gibson, co-host of the Trauma Super Conference. I'm delighted to be speaking with Britt Frank today. She's a trauma specialist who is a somatic experiencing practitioner and is trained in internal family systems level 3. She was an award-winning instructor at the University of Kansas and has taught classes on ethics, addiction, and social work practice. Her first book, The Science of Stuck, is out now. Thank you so much for joining me, Britt.
Hi, it's so good to be back here again.
So I always love the way that you outline what trauma is. So I'd love if you could start by outlining the difference between trauma and a trauma response.
And that word is so trendy now, which is great because I'd rather we all talk too much about it than not at all. But the word has tended to get overused, misused, watered down. So the definition of trauma that I use comes from Dr. Peter Levine, who founded Somatic Experiencing. And trauma is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon. And my little addition to that is or not enough. Trauma is anything you got that you didn't need or anything that you didn't get that you did need. A trauma response is when our bodies, trauma is an internal process. It's a brain indigestion process. A trauma response is when our brain either throws up or goes into freeze. So you can eat bad food and not necessarily get sick. Same thing with trauma. You can experience a traumatic event and not necessarily have a trauma response. But the things that we call panic, anxiety, things like that are often trauma responses, which is the symptom or the behavior or the manifestation of the trauma that we experienced or witnessed.
And furthermore, to your point, not something we decide we have. This is a physiological and cognitive process that happens outside of our cognitive awareness. We're not deciding to have trauma if we have trauma, right?
Yes, and it's so important to know that you don't get a say. And I've seen people say, well, that wasn't a traumatic event. I'm like, okay, that might not have been a trauma. Being bullied, for example, normal part of childhood. That doesn't mean that for some people, given their family and their genetics and their attachment, that being bullied is not going to have long-term traumatic consequences. So our unconscious automatic nervous systems get to decide what counts as trauma and we don't. And the thing about trauma is you can be traumatized by a traumatic event, but you can also be traumatized by seemingly normal events. You know, having a baby, getting married, moving to a new city, starting a new job. These aren't inherently bad things, but anything like food, like any food can cause indigestion, any event can create a trauma response.